Welcome to The Writer's Dream. Our show is a show where authors can talk about their books, how they write them, how they publish them, and how they market them. My name is Linda Maria Frank. I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. You can find us, The Writer's Dream, on YouTube. And we also have a Facebook page. If you have a question for us, please address it to the Facebook page, and we would be happy to answer it. Our guest today is Susan Pashman, and she is the author of Upper West Side Story. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Tell us about your book.
My book is about parenting. At least to me, that is what it is most deeply about. It's written in the voice of a mother who has just found her son's diary from the year he was 13, which was a terrible, terrible year for the family. And she is thumbing through the diary and sees his comments and his writings and recalls what happened in that terrible year. Basically what happened was that this family of very liberal activist people living on the Upper West Side, the mother and father had both been radicals in their college days and had done a lot of very, very good things in their community. The husband is head of the environmental affairs for the city of New York, and she's a women's studies professor. But she and her very close friend, a black woman, have set up a special enrichment program at their kids' school to give an enriched program to very bright students. And her son is the best friend of the black woman's son. So they've really formed a kind of rainbow-colored family together. And it's just a wonderful dream. In fact, the first title I had for this book was An Interpretation of Dreams, alluding to Martin Luther King's dream. But something happens, something very terrible happens, and it has repercussions through the entire neighborhood and ultimately through the entire city, where racial tensions that had been bubbling under the surface all along, resentments and distrust between the two races, just flare up and practically destroy this family and the children.
Well, it sounds very timely.
Well,
considering what's happening in the nation today.
It is unfortunately timely. And I wish I could say that I sat down a year ago and wrote it to be timely. But in fact, I started writing this book 14 years ago. I did a lot of other things in the meantime. I wasn't poring over it for 14 years. But it was mostly done when Obama was elected to his first term. Mm-hmm. And I was thrilled to see Obama walk out and make his acceptance speech with his family. And at the same time, my heart sank because I said, oh, well, now that we have a black president, this book about racial conflict is going to be obsolete. And you know how many years ago that was?
Yes, 8 years. Well,
and
it
is more urgently, pressingly relevant than it ever was.
Well, I think having a black president has really, in a way, done us a favor because it has shown us truly what the picture of racial relationships are in this country and what we need to fix.
Well, in a way, it's called out what was under the surface. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't so much made progress for black people as it has brought out of hiding all of the bias that was really just right under the surface.
Yes.
In my book, however, it's the resentment of the black people on the Upper West Side and in those neighborhoods that really starts coming to the surface more than anybody suspected it was. There are a lot of black families in this book who have had their children in this program of special enrichment, and when all hell breaks loose, they end up telling this very high-minded, do-gooder liberal woman that they don't really think that program is going to do their kids any good at all. That their kids are going off into the Army, and they'd be lucky to get jobs as mechanics, and that taking them to the opera is really doing nothing for them but making them envious of something they can't have. So there's a lot of
That's a pretty honest assessment.
right in your face stuff, yes, and the reviewers have been pointing that out, not noting it as a defect, but saying, you know, that it's sort of a brave book.
Well, I think
writing.
as a teacher, education is the answer,
Yeah.
but not the kind of education that you're talking about here. We need job training.
Well, and you know, these little gifts that well-thinking people, high-thinking people start giving and feeling so good about are not getting anything but resentment in return. This book got started at a Thanksgiving dinner. My brother lives in Riverdale, which is
Yes.
definitely a white enclave. And at the time, his son was in junior high school. And at Thanksgiving, he said, "We're having a wonderful thing happen in Jared's school. 8 little black children are coming in to spend the year in his class. Isn't that wonderful?" And I was horrified. And I said, "Really?" I said, "And suppose 8 little white children from Jared's class were sent down to Harlem so that all the black children could learn how white kids behave. Wouldn't that be interesting? How do you think your son would feel if he was the little guinea pig in that experiment?" And my brother didn't really want to hear this, but his son was looking at me and thinking this over. And I said, "You know, you're really using those black children as an education, as a teaching device for your son. And I think that's absolutely awful." And he said, "Well, how else are we going to start getting people together?" I said, "You know, I just don't think this is right. I think it's making you feel good, but I'm wondering how it makes the children feel." And my nephew was sitting there going like this. And I went home that night, and I started thinking of all the things that could go wrong in that setup. But thinking about it in terms of the children involved, not the parents who were going to. I think the black parents might have felt very fortunate that their kids were going to this school where there isn't a lot of trouble in the hallways, and the white parents were certainly feeling very proud of themselves. But I was wondering about the kids, and that's how the book got started. I just had an image as I was falling to sleep of some terrible thing that could have happened quite by accident and thrown everybody into a downward spiral. And that's how the book came.
No, I see in your biography that you are a philosophy teacher and also a former attorney. Do you still practice law?
No, but you can't ever stop being an attorney.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a way of thinking.
It doesn't come off.
But it's a way of thinking.
It is.
It's a
and
logical.
I have to say, you know, I was newly divorced. I had 2 little boys, 4 and 6, and I was directing a grant-funded program. And my mother called up and said, "You know, the grant is going to run out at some point, and what are you going to do? You can't feed your children on philosophy." And I said, "Well, I don't know, I'll think about it." And she said, "No, I've thought about it. You have to go to law school." And I've never been a particularly obedient child, but for some reason I did. I thought, well, I know I can do this. I mean, philosophy and law are not that unrelated, and the logical thinking that carries through in both of them is the same. I went to law school. I hated it. I was much too old to be in law school. And then I went to Wall Street, to a very prestigious firm that I hated even more. And after 10 years, I finally had everything in place so that my kids could go to college. And I came out here, which was a childhood summer home. And I just never went back. And I thought, boy, law school was the worst waste of time, and being a lawyer was the worst thing I ever did. It was so painful. But you know, my publisher describes this as legal fiction. which is a term of art in the law, but the plot is so driven by various turns in the law and ways of working things out that only lawyers would come up with, that I realized that, so one good thing came from going to law school.
That was my question, as
Yeah.
whether or not that background influenced this book. And also, where do you teach philosophy?
Now I give philosophy away. I teach philosophy at the Hampton Library. I have long been retired, but I used to teach at Adelphi University.
I taught at Hofstra.
Oh, okay,
And
the other school.
Yeah, the other school. Well, I won't say. I was gonna choose between the two of them, but
No,
I also
Hofstra
taught
has-
at Adelphi. I supervised student teachers there.
Oh.
But I did like Adelphi. So
I taught philosophy there, and I taught part-time at a lot of different schools around, even at CW Post, 2 or 3 semesters, and New York Institute of Technology, where I taught logic to engineers. But I did it. Yeah. But then, of course, I became a lawyer. And when I moved out here, after a long time, I was finally able to buy some land and design a house and build a house. And I realized I didn't know what I was doing with the landscaping. So I went to Harvard for 5 years. I commuted from Sag Harbor to Cambridge every week. And I finished a degree in landscape design and decided not to do an actual landscape plan as my final project. I wrote basically a philosophical treatise on landscape,
oh, how neat.
which I realized was really a version of what I had started to do as my PhD, and I had never finished it when I was training in philosophy. And I went on and I got a master's in landscape aesthetics. And after I got back from accepting that degree, I sat for just 5 minutes and I said, I should call Columbia back now, it's only 45 years later, and tell them that I'm ready to finish my doctoral dissertation. Well, Columbia being Columbia, that was not possible because they said, there's nothing to come back to. All the professors you were working with have died. And I wanted to make a nice philosophical argument and tell them that actually the reason we have an institution is that it lives longer than philosophy. But I had also found a professor at Stony Brook who was very interested in the aesthetics of the environment. And he was thrilled to have me come and write my doctoral dissertation there. So
that's
I
great.
did.
Yeah.
But all along, I would say for maybe 15, 16 years, I have been teaching philosophy for free out here, first at the Jewish Center, and then I moved it to the Hampton Library. And I have a group of adults. Every year we get new people in, but there's a little core there of people who decided that in their retirement they really wanted to learn philosophy, and it's just been wonderful for me.
I think they should teach philosophy in high school. I think there
I
should
agree.
be part of the social studies curriculum should be philosophy because it's something that ties everything together.
Yes, it does.
And the kids need that because
Well, I started out as a physics major in college, and I was for 3 years, and I thought it was because it was going to give me the secret of the universe, which it does.
cosmology.
Well, it gives you the secrets of the physical universe, but because I was taking philosophy courses all along, I thought, that's only part of the universe. But you're right. Philosophy is, as Aristotle said, the master science. It ties everything.
I always told my students when I was teaching science in middle school and high school that the scientists today are the true philosophers because
Yes.
a philosopher is a seeker of truth.
Yes.
Astrophysics to
Yes.
me is the
Yes.
search for the core of what the physical world is, the natural world, and perhaps what lies behind there. I always talk about dark energy and dark matter.
Oh, my
who
philosophy
knows,
students are always trying to find philosophical implications.
Yeah, well, sure. Isaac Asimov,
Yeah.
The Big Bang
Yeah,
was
and,
really
and the
God.
fact is that everyone thinks philosophy is so abstruse, but when I've talked, well, to my own sons when they were growing up, and to my grandson sometimes about philosophy, it's quite accessible to kids. They understand
And they like it.
where it's going. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, it has a fairy tale element to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know when chemistry got too boring, I would go off into something.
Well, my chemistry teacher in high school tried to make it interesting by saying, well, some ions are like men who have an extra ring that they have to give away, and other ions are like women who are dying to have that ring.
Yes, yes, I made chemistry
They
all
made
about
it
sex
sexy.
myself because you were really dealing with those hormones all the time.
Yeah.
It was fun. I'd like to read some of your reviews.
I'd love you to read those reviews.
But the book is published, but it's not released yet. When is the
Right.
date?
The pub date is May 27th, so by May 28th, it's listed on Amazon, it's listed on Barnes & Noble, but you can't order
You
it
have
yet.
you
It
can't
will-
pre-order?
No, you can order it starting on May 28th, and you can get it in softcover or in Kindle edition.
Are you having a big book launch?
I am having a pre-book launch and a major book launch. Because I teach
So
at
tell
the
us about that.
Because I teach at the Hampton Library, they've asked me to be part of their reader series that ends the night before this book is published. So I will be reading on May 19th at the Hampton Library at 7:30 p.m. I know it's been listed in the materials that the Friends of the Library send out, but it's going to be posted in the local papers as well. That will be a pre-publication launch, but I will have the book to sell and sign at that event. On June 13th, at Dodds and Eder in Sag Harbor, we're going to have a huge book launch, lots of food and wine and bubbly things to drink, and that's also open to the public.
Very nice.
So you can get a book
And that's June
get drunk
13th?
too. Yes, June 13th at 5 o'clock. It will be a reading.
Very
at
nice.
Dodds and Eder.
All right, so let me read some of these reviews because they're wonderful. Susan Pashman's book does what Sue Miller's The Good Mother did for an earlier era. It exposes the tensions beneath polite, contented liberal society and how they can explode when something goes wrong. Well observed and heartbreaking. And this is from Hannah Rosen, writer at The Atlantic and Slate, author of The End of Men and the Beginning of Women.
She's great. I love her.
What if the bonfire of the vanities was set in the present time and told from a woman's perspective? Upper West Side Story gives you an irresistible answer. And this is from Lara Vapmeier.
Lara Vapmeier is an Indian-American
Yeah, I figured
writer.
that.
Yeah.
And she is the author of Memoirs of a Muse, There Are Jews in My House, and The Scent of Pine. New York neighborhoods, New York parenthoods, race. Susan Pashman's powerful story of a fracturing family in a fractured city is fraught with understanding. And this is Peter Behrens, award-winning author of The Law of Dreams and The O'Briens. In this powerful novel, Susan Pashman picks up the most delicate but most pressing subjects in our national discourse and sets it down in the surroundings of a heart-rending tale of parental love and tender friendship. Everything is here: domestic disruption, generational divides, urban and academic politics, and most courageously of all, racial resentments and distrust. Pashman knows her ways through it all and handles it with intelligence and lovely writing. And that's from Joanne Miller, former editorial director of Basic Books. That's a real, I'm so impressed because this is probably a very needed book. I'm hoping you get a bestseller out of this because it's so timely.
From your lips.
Yeah, I know, but it's so timely. It's watching TV, and all of the racial tensions that have been going on in various cities in the United States. We need to get back on track. I think people know what the answers are.
Well, I got to tell you, I was told, as I guess every everybody who has a book coming out in these recent times was told, that I have to get on social media. Okay, so I began tweeting, and I tried a number of different things. But the ones that people responded to and started following me about were tweets, and I found wonderful pictures to put with them, so I'm sure pictures attract people too. But I started tweeting about the way to end unconscious bias, because that's really, that's what was called out after Obama got elected. People who thought they weren't biased and then suddenly were when they saw a black president. And unconscious bias is what's pulling the trigger on those guns when they're in the hands of angry policemen. And I appreciate that the policemen are under a lot of pressure and very frustrated, but they don't shoot white people as the way they shoot black people.
Absolutely. And
I'm willing to say that many times it is unconscious. But I gave a lot of thought to this, and I began tweeting that the way to get to the end of unconscious bias is by making friends with people of other races. And the reason I think this book is so timely is that at the core of this book is a friendship between a black woman and a white woman who are each other's best friends, not just people they know and say hello to. They are each other's confidants. They are the ones who hold each other up in bad times. And the other friendship that's tested in this book is the friendship between these two 13-year-old boys, one black, one white. They are their school's chess champions, and they go to Madison Square Garden every year to compete in the junior chess championship. And they don't really have friends apart from each other. They are their best buddies. And I have been tweeting, now is the time. Have lunch today with somebody of a different race. Share a secret today with somebody of a different race.
Well, that to prove your point, that was when New York City had the riots, and one of the changes that they made in the police force was to have the policemen either buddy up with someone of a different race, but also to learn the people in their neighborhood, to learn to know the people in their neighborhood.
Yeah, but so often people will say that they're not racist, that they wouldn't discriminate, and they mean it. But not discriminating is very different from
including
and understanding that this person and I have so much more in common than not. And when you can share a secret with someone, that's a good friend. When you regularly break bread with a person, that's a good friend. And people, once I started tweeting that kind of thing, when I first started it, it was February, and I said, the February challenge, make a new friend of a different race. The March challenge, have lunch today with someone of a different race. The April challenge, share a secret with someone of a different race. And people are very responsive to that because they understand that I'm challenging them at a deeper level.
Yeah. One of the TV shows that was doing commentary this week, the question that was asked of a congressman was, how many of your colleagues in Congress really understand what it's like to be poor and hungry? And how many of them understand what it's like to go to a school that you know is substandard just because you're black? And those are the questions that people really, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the other
Elijah
person.
Cummings was out on the street last night talking to the gang members, which was very courageous and very necessary, and they were not going to hurt him. You knew that.
Yeah, no.
And
my mother was from Baltimore. And so I spent many summers as a child in Baltimore. And I remember the days, and this is back, I guess, in the 50s, when I remember the separate bathrooms and water fountains. I remember elderly black lady stepping off the sidewalk to let us walk by. So it's,
Yeah, yeah.
so you have to know the history of the city and where those people are coming from. You really have to try to understand.
Yeah, it's, we think of this as being Alabama and Louisiana, but Washington is
Well, the only
very
reason why
segregated.
Maryland wasn't in the Confederacy was because Lincoln wouldn't allow it because it was too close to D.C. I mean,
DC,
truly,
yeah.
historically,
Yeah.
that is what happened.
Yeah.
My son lives in Maryland now, and he takes me to places where racism rules. It really is
Yes.
very rampant.
Yes.
It's very sad.
Yes.
But we can only move ahead, and I certainly think that writing a book like that opens people's minds to a different way of thinking.
I was able to start it so long ago because I saw in my own family.
Oh, yeah.
I saw my brother, who was a district attorney in the Bronx, saying how proud he was that there were going to be 8 little black kids in his son's school. And I'm sure my brother works with black people who are in the DA's office. I mean, it's not Baltimore in the 50s, but he still had what I consider a patronizing attitude that he was completely unaware of.
Yeah, well, I think that is what you're pointing out. So we have about 30 seconds. What would you like to say about your book to the public to wrap it all up?
Well, we've been talking a lot about race, and I'm sure that that's what is the most salient point in this book because it is about racial conflict. But much of what is in this book came not from my experience as a lawyer or my experiences in academe, which play in here, but my experiences as a mother. And I raised 2 boys by myself in the city. And it's not the same as raising them out here or raising them in a suburb. It's a very different situation. One of my sons was stopped on his way to school and his sneakers were taken. And I had to explain to him why. So I hope people will also view this as a book about parenthood because
And friendship.
that's what it is. Yes.
And friendship.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.
Delightful talking to you.
Good luck.